Welcome back to the future, and thanks for taking the time to watch our BA4 experimental game final metamorphing presentation video. If you are also tired of those boring analog pinball machines and want to see how we morph the analog and digital world into a beautiful moth, then you've come to the right neighborhood. I'm Kevin Walter, still pretending to be the project lead of this futuristic experience, and I'm accompanied by Tamina Brunke as our designer, Arthur Kehrwald and Marco Cristoforetti for our programming time travel department, and Sebastian Gerena and me for everything that's not the shape of a grey box. With the team being introduced, let me now give the floor to Tamina.
Hey, thanks Kevin. But before we dive further into design, let me tell you a bit more about the history of the game genre we're talking about. The origins of the pinball machine can be traced back to France in the late 18th century, based on the game called bagatelle, which is a wooden board with pins in it, and the ball can fall down into holes with different values. However, let's skip a bit further when pinball machines actually enter the game industry in the 30s, with the electrification of the game, introducing coil-operated pinball machines. These early pinball machines don't really resemble the machines we know nowadays. The biggest game changer in pinball history was the invention of the flipper in 1947 in Gottlieb's Humpty Dumpty, adding a level of skill to the until then perceived game of chance. The second huge wave of the popularity came in the mid-1970s with the introduction of the solid-state pinball machine, adding tons of new features, electronic sounds, and of course the iconic background lighting. Very similar to those machines are pinball machines produced nowadays, which are mostly manufactured with more advanced technology like LED panels or monitors. With the digitalization also came the digitalization of pinball machines into virtual space. All classic can be played on phones or digital machines which only have a screen or controls. This opened up a whole new world for animations and special effects, which used to be produced limited by mechanical means. Furthermore, out of the realm of classical pinball machines are video games like Yoku's Island Express or Momonga's Pinball Adventure, which are just focusing on recognizable core mechanics of conventional machines, like the flippers, bumpers, or slingshots, dumping the traditional playing field and its limitations altogether. Now, after all this comes the future. Future Box Pinball is a pinball machine combining mechanical, digital, and unconventional parts of pinball history together, which opened up new possibilities for gameplay and visual, but it also had its struggles, which leads us to the layout that went through some major changes. One of the biggest reasons for those changes was the decision to print new 3D models, which unfortunately did not happen due to Corona, but it's still one of our future plans for this project. We took a lot of inspiration from the pinball machines of the 80s and 90s, with a huge focus on the upper fourth of the playing field. However, the dimensions of those pinball machines are vastly different from ours, which compares more to pinball machines of the 40s or 70s. In addition to that, we needed a layout which supported the digital side of our game, which allows us to unlock certain elements in the game at later stages and not be in the way during earlier stages. After a lot of trial and error, we created a layout which has the look and feel of an 80s or 90s pinball machine on a much smaller dimension. It does not look too overcrowded and still allows the player the freedom to aim and adjust the strength of the plunger for more variety and strategy. Continuing with the target audience of our game, we want to appeal to players who are not afraid of trying out new experimental things, as well as an older generation who want more sentimental values in those pinball machines. Most of the players we'd like to address are inexperienced with this kind of mix of pinball machine, which was a huge factor in the way we tried to balance and pace our game. A lot of the balancing was made based on the fact that many players will be introduced to something new, even more experienced pinball players, due to the unconventional mechanics of having an enemy, the power-ups, or just the combination of the digital and physical playing field. The goal was to not discourage the player from restarting and playing again, so the starting stages are quite easy, which allows the player to get quite far into the final fight, which is still a challenge at the very end for more experienced players. We also made the decision to rework some of the existing mechanics in the game. namely the shop mechanic, which disturbed the game flow tremendously. So we combined the moon and the shop, and now we have a shop roulette, which chooses a power-up randomly. Now continuing with art.
Hello everyone, this is Sebastian, and this time I just rather focus all my energy doing the UI and creating the ground for the machine. Due to the feedback we got from the people that play the game, it was my duty to implement some changes to make the gameplay a more pleasant experience for the user. So basically, I rebuilt the icons and the layout for the central UI between the slingshots, in other words, the shop, to make them more comprehensible to the user. And in addition to this new set of UI for the shop, I did this red UI as a feedback so the player knows when the health is in the critical state. Moving to my other big task in this project, and is one of the most important parts in the pinball visuals. Talking about the ground layout. This piece was especially a challenge for me because, as we mentioned, Ned, in our previous presentations, we have not only to think about the elements in the ground, but also the ones displayed on the screen. So I had to be really careful that the ground doesn't interfere with the gameplay, but at the same time to give it this crazy look, which is a fundamental characteristic in all the pinballs. So I had a bunch of experimental sessions where in the end I came out with this new retrograde crazy look layout. For the printing part, I faced an extra challenge because I had to take into account that the color mode is CM/K, so the colors are more washed. Plus the material should not attenuate the light beneath. But in the end, it turns out in a really good result, and we are really happy with this ground layout. And combine it with the gameplay is really cool. Thank you.
So here you can see some variations of our health bars. Only the two enemy models have those floating health bars, and the main difference I want to point out here is that the Emperor, our main boss, is equipped with two health bars. The smaller colorful bar is meant for the protective shield the boss uses, and it can be damaged with just a few hits. And to indicate that, the shield bar is mainly separated from the main bar by its color and its overall length. Concerning the 3D prints, all that I can say is that I always wanted to develop an idea to a sketch, bring it into a 3D program, have it printed back in a physical world, and then paint it on my own. Great experience. Glad that I did it, and 10 out of 10 would recommend doing this at least once in their life. But if you have to do it for a large number of models, it can get tedious very quickly, since you have to put several layers of color over and over again in order to get nice and saturated colors. I probably did a lot of mistakes in the whole coloring process, and if anyone considers printing and coloring 3D models on their own, hit me up so I can tell you what I have learned, so you don't have to do the same mistakes again. But in the end, I was glad that I could spend some time away from my PC monitor, and creating real physical objects does feel a little bit more rewarding than creating zeros and ones on your PC. Finally, I want to show you a selection of particle effects that I did. Before working on this project, I didn't know too much about particles, and always thought that there's not too much to do with them since all particles always kind of look the same to me. I then looked up a lot of Diablo and League of Legends effects and tried to recreate some of them since our pinball machine has also somewhat of a top-down perspective. Combining particles with other particles, and especially with mesh and UV animation, has changed the whole game for me. I would always create one effect out of at least 3 different moving elements, and for the next effect I wanted to create, I just kept one of those elements as a base. That way I could reuse a lot of work that I've done and create ever-changing effects in no time.
Because we've made quite fundamental changes to the gameplay by almost completely overhauling the playing field layout and adding several new game mechanics, as well as visual feedback and lots of UI elements. Implementing all of this has kept me quite busy on the gameplay programming side. although I did still find the time to improve the pinball physics a little bit and also work on face tracking. It is becoming apparent now, though, that face tracking probably just isn't reliable enough and has too much performance overhead to really be the ideal solution, so we're definitely looking for alternatives. One of them would be infrared head tracking with an active infrared emitter. So I've built this this thing here that you can strap to your head and then use it to track the position of the player's head, hopefully much more reliably and faster. There are still lots of things to try out in terms of head tracking and also when it comes to 3D vision. So I'll definitely continue working on this at least until the end of this semester, if not well into the 5th semester as well.
So here we are at the end. If we can call this the end, I mean, this project will go on forever probably, but we made some really good progress this semester thanks to the hard work that everybody put in, and we implemented many features we wanted. In my particular case, the real mechanical elements of the box are finally working. The plunger was the easiest part because it was already working and we just had to build it inside the box and connect it to the spring mechanism. About the buttons on the side, the keyboard library I was using turned out to be not a good solution for us, so I switched to the joystick library instead. But because Godot somehow didn't like my custom input, I ended up emulating a keyboard again, but from a Xbox 360 emulator, which is emulating the Arduino joystick emulator. And this image, I guess, explains best the process. Just stack adapters on adapters on adapters until it works. Lastly, the rear flippers inside the box are also working. After one dead Arduino, a few other overheating and melting objects, I managed to build a circuit which is not burning. But it was really hard to get there. Even with help from friends, I had a hard time understanding the motors, how they work and how to control them. And there's no documentation about them, so we just had a trial and error process. At the end, I used some double pole relays which switch polarity to make the motors retract and push out when pressed, when the buttons are pressed. It doesn't sound hard, but it was really, really difficult and exhausting. Probably most difficult part of the project for me. I finally soldered everything together for stability and because my breadboard melted, and I built it inside the box. After so much pain, research, and learning, I still feel a complete ignorant in this field, but I have a lot of fun and I definitely stimulated my interest in electronics and Arduino stuff, and I can't wait to melt and burn something else. I'm so glad I had the chance to continue my work on this project, and I look forward on perfecting it more and more till the end of time.
Thanks, Marco, and thanks to all the others for all the great work they did. And I'd like to finish the presentation with a quote from Einstein. "It's an awesome game, and maybe too awesome to be real." Thanks for your attention and see you in the future.